Apothecary again before leaving the house. Klein tossed a coin to inquire if it was beneficial for him to visit the Bravehearts bar that day. After receiving a negative result, he looked around before whispering into the air, "Is someone monitoring me today?" After a few seconds of silence, Miss Bodyguard's ethereal voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "No." Klein subconsciously looked back, but he failed to find Miss Bodyguard. His attention quickly returned to the answer he received, as he couldn't help but let out a snicker in his heart. MI9 isn't even putting me on their suspect list at all. After confirming that Risego hadn't sought me out, they completely put me aside. Should I feel honored or insulted? It's true that a detective that busies himself looking for cats has no way of being associated with the assassination of an ambassador or getting rid of a Sequence 5 expert. Furthermore, MI9 has been monitoring me for quite some time. My panic, my helplessness, and my struggle for self-preservation were laid out for them to see. It's obvious that I can't inflict any substantial harm to the ambassador. With that in mind, Klein put on his half-top hat, carried his black silver inlaid cane, and walked out of 15 Mince Street. He spent 2 solely for a rental carriage that brought him to Braveheart's bar on Iron Gate Street in the Backland Bridge area. He entered like a regular, walked past the cheering drunkards around the boxing ring, and rapped the countertop when he came to the bar counter. 1 glass of Southfield beer. The bartender looked up at him and mumbled, "Kaspar's is in card room 3. Klein smiled and pushed 5 one-penny copper coins to the man. Then, carrying the wooden cup and sipping a white, smooth, frothy Southfield beer, he walked around 2 of the rowdiest, liveliest stages that stank the most and knocked on the door of card room 3. Kaspar's was playing Texas poker with unlimited stake. Stacks of cash were piled high in front of him, as well as yellow coins that piled up in a dazzling heap. Noticing Klein's gaze, the black market arms dealer with the huge scar on his face twitched his big red nose and casually said, "I don't like using chips as they don't feel real to me. It's still the texture of cash and the weight of the coins that leaves me intoxicated. It's the same as F-King women." After finishing that sentence, Kaspar's frowned slightly. "What are you doing here again?" Klein didn't answer directly, but he gestured with his mouth to speak outside. "Damn it. I was going to clean them up with this hand." "Bullshit and folding." Kaspar's tossed the 2 cards in front of him into the middle of the table. Then he limped to the door and said to Klein, "You'd better have a good reason." After leaving the card room and coming to the corner, Klein said in a suppressed voice, "I want to know when the most recent gathering will be, just like the last one." Kaspar's looked at him suspiciously. "Haven't you struck a deal with Marek? TT's not about hiring bodyguards. Regarding that, I've become very interested in it." Klein was telling the truth. Kaspar's hesitated and then said, "There will be a gathering tonight. The organizer is the same person as last time, but you'll have to wait for more than half an hour. I'll inform them first. You showed your reputation last time, so I don't think there'll be too much of a problem." "No problem, I'll pay you." Klein touched the bills in his pocket. "You just need to pay £1 this time." Kaspar's acted like he was very generous. "TT's worth it," Klein said as the corners of his lips curled up. After paying Kaspar's, he found a seat and sat down, drinking the rich malt-scented Southfield beer and enjoying the competition on the ring. T can beat and take them down at the same time. Klein quickly came to this conclusion. After about 10 minutes, Kaspar's returned to the bar, looked around and said in a low voice, "They agreed. We'll head there after half an hour. Holy Lord of Storms, I hope you haven't forgotten that mask." Klein gave a positive answer. He slowed down his drinking as he began sipping, and he took half an hour to finish the 500 ml of Southfield beer. It was the same path they took as the previous time, and it was the same house without any light. Klein put on the iron mask that only covered half of his face, and he watched as Kaspar's knocked on the door rhythmically. The rhythm is different from last time. The knocking changes all the time. Klein listened carefully for a moment, then saw the small plank of the door open and a pair of eyes peer out. After the indistinguishable process like before, he put on the hooded robe and hid his entire face in the shadow. It was still the same living room, with a candle flickering in the dim light. Klein randomly found a seat and quietly sat down. But unlike before, he no longer felt suppressed or tensed. Instead, he leisurely looked around. The cold wind that blew across the back of his neck made him certain that Miss Bodyguard had followed him in without anyone noticing. As expected, there are no Sequence 5 experts in this gathering. There might not even be a Sequence 6, Klein thought. After listening in on the conversation for a while, he saw the round-faced apothecary change his posture as if he wanted to speak. As expected, the apothecary, who had half his chubby face exposed, quickly raised his hand and said, "Black Snake has apparently died in the sewers. Those beasts are still rampant." Black Snake died. Klein was surprised to hear the news. Black Snake was the man who had sold him the remains of a listener, allowing him to successfully create the language of foulness. It was suspected that he was from the Aurora Order. His strength wasn't low at all, yet he actually died performing the simple mission of clearing the beasts in the sewers. Klein frowned suspiciously. He suddenly thought of something. When he discovered Zeriel's corpse, he had heard thumping sounds deep in the sewer. By the time he led Ian there, parts of Zeriel's body had been eaten by strange beasts. That was at the bottom of Iron Carbon Street in the East Borough, quite far from the Backland Bridge area, and I wonder if there's a connection. Klein had no impulse to verify this. News of Black Snake's death quickly spread through the dark room, attracting the murmurs of many. A sense of fear spread through them, as though they had experienced it themselves. The apothecary clapped his hands and said, "So, what should I do?" The whispers suddenly disappeared, and a frozen silence filled the room. As the apothecary had advised him without being afraid of offending him, Klein thought for a moment and said, "If I were you, I would give up on the rest of the herbs and never go there again." "Why?" "They'll mature very soon, and those beasts that hide in the depths of the sewers usually won't come out," the apothecary asked hesitantly. Klein deliberately said in a hoarse voice, "Black Snake likely has an organization backing him. His death definitely would have caused an investigation. I believe you don't want to interact with them, right?" Having the remains of a listener didn't imply that Black Snake was an Aurora Order member. By referring to the true creator as a great being, this was confirmed. Moreover, he would rather believe that this was the case rather than hope for a fluke. "Yeah." The apothecary nodded slightly, seemingly having made up his mind. Klein added, "If I were you, I would even anonymously report this matter to the police." "What?" many gathering members exclaimed. Klein explained without a change in tone. "Since the beasts in the sewers can kill Black Snake, it means that they're very dangerous. And since everyone lives in Backland, if it really causes a major catastrophe, it's hard to guarantee that we won't be implicated. That's why the best option is to attract the attention of the police and let the officials handle this matter. We can enjoy a good outcome without any risks. Isn't that nice?" Just as he finished his sentence, the old gentleman, Eye of Wisdom, applauded. "Such a great idea. We're afraid of the official beyonders, but similarly, we can make use of them. We don't have to handle everything on our own." "That's because I was an official beyonder, so my train of thought would definitely be different from pure savages like you," Klein smiled as he lampooned. After speaking, he became a bystander again, listening to people peddling or requesting for items. As he watched the deals which succeeded or failed, he found nothing of interest. He temporarily didn't announce the beyonder ingredients he needed, planning to observe the circle of beyonders a few more times. Seconds turned to minutes, and finally, Eye of Wisdom arranged for people to leave every 3 minutes. Klein was the first to leave the previous time, so he didn't know what happened next. Now he noticed that there were at least 5 exits. The attendants of the Eye of Wisdom would lead different people to different passages, trying their best to space them out and drag out time. After more than half an hour, there were only 3 members of the gathering left. Apart from Eye of Wisdom, the other 2 were Klein and the suspected apothecary. Eye of Wisdom looked at Klein and laughed with his aged voice. "Looks like you're quite lucky." He recognized me as the man who had bought the ominous item from Black Snake. Klein smiled. "Yes, my bet paid off." Hearing their conversation, the apothecary widened his eyes as he examined Klein. After a long time, he finally said, "Do you have another mystical charm that affects luck? I already regarded you as a dead person." "You're so direct," Klein tactfully answered. "Maybe I'm lucky enough myself." Actually, he did want such an item. Eye of Wisdom sighed and said, "Young lad, don't always bet on your luck, especially on matters such as this. Even if you've won many times in the past, just one loss would doom you for eternity. No. That's why I've come to this gathering, to see if I can buy any useful item." I can be considered the same as all of you now," Klein said, seemingly casual. "Same." The apothecary gave an exaggerated sigh. "I should have listened to my teacher." Teacher, he seems to be a suspected apothecary. The apothecary pathway is controlled by the Church of Mother Earth and the Life School of Thought. The life school of thought passes down their teachings through mentoring. Klein's heart skipped a beat and asked curiously, "Why do you say that?" The apothecary sighed and said, "My teacher told me to choose a path that would make one sufficiently lucky, but in the end, I still became a medicine concoctor. As a result, I haven't been able to find the next batch of potion ingredients for this sequence for a whole 2 years. I'm envious of your luck. Make one sufficiently lucky. This is very similar to the sequence pathway for Monster. He really is from the life school of thought." Klein smiled and said, "What's your reason for choosing it?" The apothecary suddenly straightened his back and said, "This is a man's choice. After knowing that I can concoct medicine to enhance my ability in that field, I chose this path without hesitation." What a godlike reason! After hearing the apothecary's answer, Klein was unable to control the changes in his expression despite being a clown. Fortunately, he was wearing an iron mask over his face. The apothecary didn't notice the reactions Klein and Eye of Wisdom had, and he began to let his hair down. "That's why I really like Backland. There are a lot of prostitutes prowling the streets, hanging outside music halls, theaters, waiting in the streets and alleys. They're either professionals or working part-time. They were originally maidservants or workers, each with different flavors. It's said that in places in the West Borough, bankrupt aristocratic ladies might occasionally appear. That's really something to look forward to." T4. Klein nudged the iron mask that covered his face upwards and quickly changed the topic. "Did your teacher have any objections to your choice?" The apothecary shook his head slightly. "No, he just kicked me out of the damn door after teaching me all the knowledge in the field of herbs, telling me to roam the world and experience life. Damn it, he didn't even tell me where to find the next potion ingredients." At this point, the apothecary looked at Klein and added, "If you know where to obtain Spring of the Elves marrow crystals, please do tell me. I'll pay you for it. Of course, you can also first buy it, and then sell it to me for a higher price. You're a lucky guy. Who knows, you might help fulfill my wish." "All right," Klein casually agreed. He then asked thoughtfully, "When that happens, can I use it to exchange for the potion formula for apothecary?" From his point of view, an apothecary was very useful as support. He could use it to groom helpers. The apothecary, who wasn't considered too fat, quickly shook his head and said, "No way. He can only teach my students." Is this a rule of the life school of thought? He might have made an oath with some secret existence as a witness. Klein wasn't surprised. At this moment, the apothecary let out a laugh. "But I can tell you where you can get the apothecary formula. It's right here in Backland." "Brilliant." Klein was pleasantly surprised. Realizing that Eye of Wisdom was about to send him off, he hurriedly asked, "Mr. Apothecary, do you have any medication to treat mental disorders and other problems?" Klein was acting for Miss Bodyguard, to make her feel more assured, having been slightly influenced by the true creator and becoming a potential lunatic, that he was desperately trying to find a cure. "Yes, there's a sedative, 10 solely for one. I'll bring you 4 in the next gathering. Trust me, this is definitely much more useful than the ones in the hospital. I've added some materials with spirituality," the apothecary replied without hesitation. How expensive in the underground market at Tingen. The number of sedatives that originated from the hospitals ranged from 1 to 2 solely, while the variety that leaked from the Nighthawks, mandated punishers, and machinery hivemind ranged from 4 to 5 solely. As this thought flashed through his mind, Klein put on a show, looked at Eye of Wisdom and said, "Dear sir, may I attend the next gathering?" "Yes, your last 2 performances are proof of your goodwill. Young lad, watch out for the Backland Morning Post daily. When there's an advertisement for the purchase of goods by the Ernst firm on the 5th page, it means that there would be a meeting here at 8 o'clock the next evening. The strength and the frequency of the knocking is based on the prices listed. The first number is the number of heavy strikes. The second number is the number of light strikes. The third number is the number of long pauses, and the fourth is the number of short pauses. The rest are meaningless," Eye of Wisdom said with a nod. After describing the information, he sighed and said, "The lives of Beyonders who are neither official or part of an organization aren't as nice as you imagine. On the one hand, we have to keep secrets, avoid the officials, and at any time, we have to maintain a cautious and careful state. On the other hand, we have to fight against the possibility of losing control and madness. Too many of our kind have died because of these 2 matters. Even if we successfully evade the officials' notice and avoid losing control and going crazy, we would still fall into the predicament of lacking ingredients and the inability to find items we want or obtain sufficient knowledge. I organized such a gathering to get everyone to help each other. Unfortunately, this is an era of scarce mystery. Many Beyonder ingredients are rarely seen. Yes, but I have Mr. Hanged Man who knows the coordinates of some of the primitive islands, and City of Silver's the son who is constantly fighting against the various monsters in the depths of the darkness. I can rely on them to obtain some of the Beyonder ingredients. Klein politely stood up with his back bent, as he bowed to Eye of Wisdom. Your character is admirable. After sitting down again, Klein suddenly remembered something and asked after some deliberation, Gentlemen, do you have any mystical item? The kind that Black Snake sold me, but ones without too serious negative effect. I wish to have some sort of ability to protect myself. His plan was to find something that caught his interest, determine the price, and then determine the target accordingly. However, I don't have any money right now, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't have any in the future. Can't I make an inquiry about the price without money? Klein silently added in his heart. The apothecary spread out his hands, indicating that he didn't have any, and even if he did, he wouldn't sell them. Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, I do have some, but I don't know what you would like to buy. Give me an approximate range. Some, he's most likely a savant pathway Beyonder who relies on external items. Klein didn't hide his envy as he said, something stronger than me. Not something that improves my combat skills. It's best if it has some mystical power. He didn't go into details, so as to maintain his image as a newcomer. Eye of Wisdom smiled and said, I have an item that suits your requirements. Its former code name was 2081. 2081. Klein asked, puzzled. His puzzlement was just a disguise on the surface, but on the inside, he was very shocked. Is this a sealed artifact that leaked out from the Chinese gate of the Church of the Evernight Goddess? Klein didn't expect to see a familiar code name here. Eye of Wisdom casually explained simply, many mystical items have rather obvious side effects that can cause certain harm. Therefore, the 7 Orthodox churches would seek them out and seal them. They're called sealed artifacts and are distinguished using numbers as code name. Over a long period of debate and exchanges, the 7 churches formed a uniform naming convention. It labels the different danger grades with 0, 1, 2, and 3. Among them, 0 is the most dangerous. Rumors say that some are terrifying items that can destroy countries or even the world. The 7 Orthodox churches will exchange information regarding Grade 0 and Grade 1, telling each other which ones they possess. Therefore, Grade 0 and Grade 1 code names won't be repeated. Grade 2 and Grade 3 are arranged by their respective churches, so different churches might have the same code name. Klein had long known about the general situation within the Nighthawks, but he was puzzled by something. Information regarding Grade 0 and Grade 1 sealed artifacts is exchanged. Wouldn't that be disclosing major secrets? It will allow the other churches to know how many hidden cards they have. Of course, this could also be seen as a form of strategic deterrence. To avoid direct conflict between the 7 churches, Klein considered the possible reason. Yes, although I'm unable to explain the reason for doing that, it has indeed happened. Legend has it that during the end of the 4th epoch or the beginning of the 5th epoch, the 7 churches came to an agreement, Eye of Wisdom said at an unhurried pace. My 2-081 was obtained from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. It allows you to understand and comprehend many things. Even an enemy's Beyonder powers can be rapidly identified, allowing me to know of their strengths and weaknesses. I'll also have a chance at being able to mimic them. The stronger the opponent, the higher the chance of failure. Of course, even success would definitely result in a huge difference from the original. That sounds very strong, proof that knowledge is power. In the end, will there be a situation where omniscience is equal to omnipotence? I retract my previous judgment. Old Mr. Eye of Wisdom might not be an appraiser. His identification of items might have relied on sealed artifact 2-081. Klein clicked his tongue silently as he asked with interest, so, how much would I need to buy it? What flaws does it have? TT will keep you in a state where your mind is churning at high speed. Once it exceeds the time limit, you'll become a retard, Eye of Wisdom replied simply without providing enough details. At this moment, the apothecary beside him muttered, perhaps your brain has already been damaged. You keep talking about your collection. Sooner or later, someone will rob you and kill you. Sir, your persuasions are always so repugnant. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Eye of Wisdom laughed and said, "How do you know that I'm not saying it on purpose to make greedy people attack me? Yes, it's like the entrapment law once described by Emperor Roselle." After the laughter stopped, he patted the armrest of his sofa and sighed. As a person who loves collecting things, it's excruciating not being able to flaunt my collection to others. He then looked at Klein. "Team, sorry. 2081 isn't for sale. It's my best collection, and back then, I spent £6,800 to buy it. A sealed artifact at this level can cost from £4,000 to £20,000 and is determined by its effects and negative side effects. However, most of the time, they can't be bought with money." "Then why did you say so much?" Klein controlled the twitching of his mouth. Seemingly sensing his reaction, Eye of Wisdom chuckled and said, "What I really wish to recommend are 2 items. The first is a brooch. It can allow you to ward off spirits and purify them, as well as use a portion of the spells in the sun domain. The flaw is that as long as you wear it, you will never feel coolness. You will forever be stuck in the warm summer of the south. The other is a hat that can change shapes. Wearing it allows you to move freely underwater for at least half an hour, and allows you to use some water or wind domain spell. The flaw is that you will desire water. Once you walk on land, you will gradually weaken. The prices of similar items range from £1,500 to £3,500, and sometimes, even if you raise the price severalfold, they aren't necessarily for sale because they rarely appear. It took me more than 3 decades to collect a few." Klein nodded slightly and said, "I'll think about it, and I'll make the decision during the next gathering." At this point, he deliberately smiled and said, "Besides, I don't have that much money right now." The concrete road had turned dirty from prolonged rain. 2 gas lamps, the height of an adult male, along the 2 sides of the road emitted a bright but misty light due to the moisture on the glass. A rental carriage drove through the night, as the surrounding pedestrians either wore hats or carried umbrellas. Klein leaned against the wall, idly admiring the evening streets of Back. At that moment, he suddenly felt the temperature inside the carriage drop significantly. A gloomy and cold wind was swirling about. Klein jerked his head around and saw that Miss Bodyguard, dressed in a black Gothic regal dress, was sitting across from him without him even realizing. Her voice was ethereal and dreamy. "That Eye of Wisdom sensed my presence." As expected, Klein nodded, unsurprised. "He has several mystical items. Perhaps he sensed you because of them. I even suspect that he has an organization behind him. Otherwise, it's quite impossible for Eye of Wisdom to collect several relatively powerful mystical items in 30 years with his power alone." Previously, Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos only had a single creeping hunger despite being one of the 7 great pirate admirals. Of course, it was possible that the latter had high standards and ordinary mystical items didn't catch his attention. After all, with creeping hunger, he could be more well-rounded and nearly be without any weaknesses. Yes, for Eye of Wisdom himself to be rich there has to be a rather good explanation as well. He's organized so many gatherings, and once he finds a suitable mystical item, he would spare no expense to get it. Having a few in his collection isn't that unbelievable, Sai. It's like he has a gold mine at home, or he runs a bank. Klein lampooned silently. He didn't mention in detail that he had guessed that Eye of Wisdom was from the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery, or from the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, out of fear that he would expose to Miss Bodyguard that he wasn't someone who had just become a Bayon. The blonde Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly, as though agreeing with Klein's suspicion. Suddenly, she frowned and looked at the window opposite her. "A rich smell of blood." "There's a strong smell of blood." Klein turned his head in puzzlement and looked out the window. There was a secluded alley in the sparse drizzle. Near the mouth of the alley, a woman wearing a gorgeous dress was on the ground. At that moment, a pedestrian walked past and on careful inspection, let out a sudden scream. The scream startled the horse slightly as the carriage driver quickly tightened the reins, slowing down the carriage. Under the light of the gas lamp, Klein saw the pale face of the woman lying on the ground at the mouth of the alley. There was a deep gash in her stomach, and her internal organs seemed to have been hollowed out. The blood on the ground around her was flowing slowly, crimson and thick. This, as a qualified former Nighthawk, he quickly thought of many similar cases. These were often related to devil worship. And when it came to devil worship, it was almost always tied to ancient organization. It was the Blood Sanctify sect that first appeared in the 4th epoch. According to the records, This was a loose alliance formed due to the worship of devil. It consisted of several so-called devil clans, such as the Noise, Andariel, and Berea clan. They weren't subordinate to each other. In their bid to proselytize faith in the devil, they committed many murders. Back in Tingen, the accountant for the Nighthawks, Mrs. Oriana, was one such victim who was thankfully saved. Of course, not all similar cases were committed by them. Many people felt that such acts were very cool and began to imitate them. "TT looks like it was done by the Blood Sanctify sect," Miss Bodyguard whispered as her figure rapidly turned translucent before vanishing. She didn't care if Klein understood her or comprehended the situation. At that moment, the carriage had already passed the scene of the crime. Klein also noticed that the patrolling police had arrived, so he held back his idea of getting off the carriage to observe and instead chose to act as an ordinary citizen who was passing by. "Yes, citizen Mr. Moriarty, the Blood Sanctify sect has the criminal pathway, which is also known as the devil pathway. It's said that after sequence 7, the corresponding Beyonder would gradually turn demonic. However, they would only reveal those signs under certain circumstances. Sequence 9 criminals have strong bodies, keen instincts, and a variety of criminal abilities, but their conscience isn't gone yet. Sequence 8, known by its ancient name Cold-Blooded, has the modern name Unwinged Angel. It means that from that moment forth, they lose their conscience and revel in evil desires, with bodies that look even more inhuman. It would also obtain some of the magical powers of the devil. Sequence 7 serial killer grasps a good deal of knowledge and rituals regarding devil worship. They like to please the devil with special serial murders. I don't know the sequences after that. The information regarding the Blood Sanctify sect and the devil pathway flashed past Klein's mind. The rain outside seemed to become heavier as the rain on the windows converged and fell, and the whole world became quiet and unclear. What's the point of thinking so much? Such matters would definitely be taken over by a Beyonder squad. It might be the mandated Punishers or Nighthawks. There's no need for me to worry. Klein shook his head with a laugh as he muttered in his mind. By the time he returned to 15 Mince Street, he had forgotten about the murder case. He went next door and knocked on the Sammers' front door, asking Mrs. Stellan to tell Mary that she could come for the evidence tomorrow afternoon. Following that, he washed up and read the newspapers, learning about the current situation and news in Backlund. On Saturday morning the next day, Klein enjoyed his breakfast slowly and went out to pick up the freshly developed photographs. He chose the one with the best view of Doragu Gale's and Erica Taylor's face, one that brought out their passion the most. After putting the photos away, he went to the Rice police station before Mrs. Mary arrived and successfully got the bail money that was worth £10 back. In the process, he also saw the real Sergeant Faxon and felt a little uncomfortable. After withdrawing the remaining £500 in cash from his account, Klein was finally done with everything after having a busy morning. Before he prepared lunch, he handed the remaining £600 to Miss Bodyguard in one go, leaving £146 solely and 5 pence on it. That was all his liquid funds. Other than Miss Justice, I have no other debts. Klein cooked himself a T-bone steak and sprinkled it with black pepper sauce. Just as he was enjoying the taste of the medium-well steak whilst in a good mood, the doorbell suddenly rang and resounded through his house. "Mrs. Mary, isn't this too early?" Puzzled, Klein put down his fork and knife, and he walked to the door. He paused for 2 seconds as the image of the visitor outside the door appeared in his mind. It was an old-fashioned gentleman in a light gray overcoat, a silk top hat, and he held a black and gold cane. He had sharp blue eyes, and his temples were streaked with white. His wrinkles were deeply engraved in his face, causing his facial muscles to seemingly sag. "May I know who you are looking for?" Klein asked after opening the door. The old gentleman said in a thick Midshire accent, "Are you Sherlock, Detective Moriarty? Do you have something you wish to entrust to me?" Klein nodded and made way, leading the old gentleman into the living room. He hesitated for 2 seconds, then asked, "Would you like coffee or tea?" "A cup of hot water, please." The old gentleman had taken off his hat and sat down. "Very well, it's very simple. Maybe I should consider getting an assistant to serve tea and clean the place." As Klein's mind wandered, he turned to the kitchen and rinsed a glass. After placing the hot water in front of the old gentleman, he walked to the sofa and sat down with his hands folded. "How may I address you?" "Millet Carter," the old gentleman answered simply. "Mr. Carter, what would you like to entrust me with?" Klein asked directly without bothering to exchange pleasantries. As he spoke, he quietly activated his spirit vision to observe Carter. This old gentleman is in quite good health. There are some problems with the color of the joints of his left leg, probably arthritis. His emotions are mostly blue from calm thinking, with a hint of anxiety. With just a glance, Klein had come to a general conclusion. Millet Carter lifted the white porcelain cup and while rubbing its surface said, "The thing is, V bought a house on William Street. I come from Midseashire and because of my business, I'll be living in Backland permanently." William Street, where's that? Having been in Backland for less than a month, Klein, who had to consult the map or rely on his intuition, tried his best to appear staid and reliable. Millet Carter looked at him, and under his gaze he continued, "Rumor has it that the house was originally owned by a bankrupt Viscount. That was about 2 to 3 decades ago. After a few changes of hands, I finally bought it. He planned on doing some renovations that suited the modern style, but I discovered a hidden secret door in the basement which leads to a very large underground structure. Considering that it might not be safe inside, I temporarily stopped construction, and I prevented the workers and servants from rashly exploring it. I hope that you can help me confirm the situation inside the underground structure." Underground structure, ancient ruins. Secret treasure. Klein thought and said, "Why didn't you call the police? The resources that the police can mobilize are more than 100 times that of a private detective like me can muster. The results of the exploration will definitely be better and more reliable." Millet Carter rubbed his nose bridge. "You don't want too many people to know about this, especially the government. If I confirm that there is no danger within the underground structure, then I intend to use it as part of the structure and repurpose it. Know that this is a high risk for you, and I'm willing to pay £50 for it. But you can't have more than 3 assistants, and I can make up for it later, depending on the circumstances." £50, that's quite a high price. If I were an ordinary detective, that would be equivalent to 2 or 3 months of my income. He's just arrived in Backland and doesn't know any other detectives. He could only read the newspapers to look for hires and ended up coming to me. Klein hesitated for a few seconds. "Let me think about it." He suddenly revealed an apologetic smile, pointed behind him and said, "I need to use the bathroom." Millet Carter nodded slightly and took a sip of hot water. After entering the bathroom and closing the wooden door, Klein looked at the mirror and took out a copper penny. Because he had Miss Bodyguard with him, he couldn't confirm it above the gray fog, so he could only rely on his own divination skill. "He should accept this commission." Klein chanted 7 times and flicked the coin as he watched it tumble down. Thud! The copper coin fell into his palm, and the king's portrait faced up, indicating a positive response. Klein slightly nodded and whispered into the air, "What does your intuition tell you?" Miss Bodyguard's figure quickly appeared in the mirror. She replied expressionlessly, "There's a certain amount of danger, but it's not great." "Very good." Klein put away the coin, washed his hands and walked out of the bathroom and into the living room. He looked at Millet Carter and said with a smile, "T'll take this commission." Structure. After signing a contract with Millet Carter and receiving an advance payment of £10, Klein didn't rush to William Street immediately. Instead, he made an appointment for 4 in the afternoon. Millet was understanding with regard to this. Alone, Detective Sherlock Moriarty definitely had to recruit people to carry out the exploration. When the old gentleman left, Klein immediately returned to the dining table and cut the steak which had turned cold before wolfing it down. Seriously, doesn't he need to eat lunch? Why must he pick such a time to come? After barely filling his stomach, Klein bitterly began cleaning up. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mrs. Mary arrived as scheduled. Her eyes were slightly red and puffy, but her face was turning gloomy. Stellan Sammer, who accompanied her, had no choice but to maintain her silence. Klein handed over an envelope containing his carefully chosen photo. "Madam, please confirm it." Mary paused for 2 seconds and slowly took in a breath. Then she took the envelope, pulled out the photo and examined it. "Excellent, very excellent. You're the most efficient and responsible detective I've ever met. I'm honored to introduce you as a member of the Kellogg Club. This is the remaining £7 for the payment." "You deserve it." Mary took out a wallet from her leather handbag and counted out a £5 note and 2 £1 notes. Then, without waiting for Klein's response, she stuffed the photo back into the envelope, put it into her handbag, and abruptly got up to leave. Taboo, taboo, taboo. Her buttonless boots made hurried sounds as she stomped on them. Stellan Sammer struggled to keep up. As she opened the door, Mary stumbled and almost fell, but fortunately Stellan caught her. With this episode, Mary clearly slowed down and seemed to turn calm. "Madam, you forgot to take the portable camera. I'll give it to Mrs. Sammer later, and she'll bring it to you." Klein silently watched this scene, slightly shaking his head without saying anything. He returned to the second floor, took a nap, waking up comfortably to the bell chimes of the nearby church. Klein had already searched the map and confirmed that William Street was at the border of the West Borough and Empress Borough, a residential area in the heart of Backlund. A nice house in West Borough and Hillston Borough costs about £2,500. Millet Carter's house is close to Empress Borough, and it's a property of a former viscount. The area is definitely sizable. The total purchase price will be at least £3,500, maybe even £5,000. That will be enough for a pretty decent mystical item. He actually came visiting me without a housekeeper or an attendant, perhaps because he's new in Backlund and hasn't settled in. Klein put on his double-breasted coat, hat, and held his cane before heading out into Mince Street. The gas lamps haven't been lit yet, and the streets were surprisingly darker than during the evenings. However, the air was fairly all right, without the suffocating air in the boroughs to the east. Taking a rental carriage, he went all the way to William Street. Klein saw a waiting manservant outside the Unit 8 house. The manservant, who was dressed in a red vest and light-colored trousers, bowed respectfully at the incoming visitor. "Good afternoon. Might I inquire if you are Detective Moriarty?" "Yes, I have an appointment with Mr. Carter." Klein nodded and followed the manservant into a mansion with a garden and lawn. The house was 2 stories tall. The first floor was in a mess, with a lot of construction materials placed everywhere. There were workers coming in and doing some modification. Millet Carter wasn't wearing a hat. Covering his nose, he walked over. "I'm very sorry about the mess and dirt here, but I do wish that everything will be fine before my family arrives in Backlund. I can only urge them to keep working nonstop." Having said that, he looked at the manservant and instructed, "Continue watching them." It's no wonder that he didn't bring any servants with him. Even his servants have become supervisors. Klein smiled and said, "I know a lot of doctors. They tell me that the newly renovated houses aren't suitable for immediate occupation. One has to wait at least 3 months to ventilate it well enough. Otherwise, old people and children who aren't strong enough will easily fall sick." "T.S. That's so?" Millet led Klein to the basement and asked doubtfully. "TVE never verified it, but I chose to believe in authority. It said that this originated from the words passed down by Emperor Roselle." Klein casually fabricated an excuse. Millet nodded, then turned to look at the door. He couldn't help but frown before asking, "Mr. Detective, you didn't bring an assistant?" "There might be quite a bit of danger in that structure." "I have an assistant. It's just that you can't see her," Klein lampooned as he said seriously, "This is my first visit, so I'll advance very carefully. If there are any problems, I will immediately retreat. Team experienced in this area, so I won't put myself in a dangerous situation. If I were matched with inexperienced assistants, it might easily affect my nimble and decisive action." Millet was startled. "You're very professional." "Professional bluff," Klein silently added. Without any further doubts, Millet led Detective Moriarty through the cluttered living room and down the stairs to a fairly spacious basement. There were no gas pipes here, but 4 metal candlesticks were set into the walls, their yellow lights flickering. Stepping on the stone pavements on the ground, Klein couldn't help but sigh in reflection. As expected of a noble's property. Even the basement has been nicely decorated. Furthermore, it's almost as big as the living room of my current house. At this moment, Millet pointed ahead and said, "There's a secret door over there. It was discovered by the workers when they were renovating." Klein focused his gaze. With the not very bright candlelight, he saw a gray stone door in the corner. It should have been part of the wall, but it was now exposed. "I'll leave the rest to you. Be safe." The old gentleman, Millet, gave Klein a lighted lantern and cautioned him. "Has this place been ventilated ahead of time?" Klein asked cautiously. Millet shook his head indiscernibly. "TT's not particularly stuffy inside, but I didn't let the workers go too far." "All right." Klein checked his belongings, put on a black glove, and under Millet's gaze, unhurriedly carried the lantern and approached the stone door. He pushed it open with his cane. Amidst the heavy creaking sounds, through the light outside, he saw a deep-colored passageway paved with stone. There were several wooden doors on both sides of the passageway, and at the end. They had already begun to rot, but they were still barely usable. Not too ancient, however, the ostentatious style of the door and the depth and thickness of the stone slabs don't match. Did the Viscount's family change it before? Klein quietly activated his spirit vision, gripped his cane and walked forward, step by step, with the lantern in hand. The light dispersed the darkness, and when he passed by the rooms on either side, he was able to see a somewhat empty scene through the open door, which was likely open due to the exploration from the workers Millet had hired. There was also a long bench and a table that shared the same aesthetic style as the door. There's no sign of spirits flashing. Klein did a brief inspection. Without stopping, he proceeded forward until he came to the end of the hall where a bifold black stone door was. Stretching out his gloved right hand, he half-clamped his cane and slowly pushed against the door. A jarring sound of friction began to reverberate through the air as the stone door slowly cracked open. Spirit light suddenly appeared in Klein's eyes, reflecting an intertwined aura of different colors. His heart tightened as he pushed the door open, before taking a few steps back. The crack in the stone door widened rapidly, and a slimy black creature fell from above. It was a snake with a triangular head and red floral patterns on its head. It straightened its upper body, shot out its tongue, and looked at Klein with cold brown eyes. One snake after another fell from above the door as they piled up at the entrance. Klein saw a large hall beyond them. In the middle of the hall, countless snakes of various colors slithered together, forming an exaggerated nest of snakes about 10 meters wide. A slimy, disgusting feeling assaulted his senses. Klein felt his scalp turn numb as he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He even wanted to look away without daring to look straight ahead. Although he was a man, he was still afraid of snakes. Snakes were the animal that he was most afraid of. This stemmed from a psychological trauma in the past. When he was a child, despite being way past his bedtime, he liked to secretly open the door to his room and watch movies with his parents through a crack. Unfortunately, his parents once watched a snake disaster movie. One scene involved the demolition of a building. The result was the unearthing of a large nest of snakes, and the dense squirming remained deeply imprinted in his mind. Can the slumber charm affect so many snakes? Klein swallowed hard and said to the air, "Do you have any solution?" Miss Bodyguard in her black Gothic dress quickly appeared by his side, her mouth tightly closed. She didn't say a thing. Klein looked at her and she looked back at Klein, but no one spoke. When a snake slowly slithered out, Klein finally coughed and repeated, "Do you have any solution?" Miss Bodyguard didn't answer. Instead, she floated, and suddenly, a cold wind blew in the passageway. Whoosh! The wind howled as it blew into the hall. The temperatures dropped rapidly as it approached the temperatures of the outside world. Whoosh! The densely packed snakes in the middle of the hall suddenly slithered in all directions, searching for a warmer, more suitable spot to survive. 2 to 3 minutes later, a thin layer of frost formed on the surface of the hall and the passageway, and countless snakes had disappeared without much of a trace. Whoosh! It continued as Klein said, chattering, That's quite enough." The surging cold wind slowed down, but the cold didn't subside. Miss Bodyguard's figure disappeared once again. Klein lifted his cane-wielding right hand, covered his mouth and nose, and sneezed. Then he raised the lantern and cautiously walked through the stone door into the wide hall. The style here was identical to the passageway outside. There were 8 circular columns of the same color erected there. Metal poles hung from the high dome, and at the bottom were candlesticks carved into different creatures. An upside-down candlestick, as a university student of the history department, a person who could barely be called an elite in this field, Klein made a preliminary judgment based on this unique arrangement. A structure of the Fourth Epoch. The history circles of the northern continent countries all recognized that the Fourth Epoch was shrouded in thick mystery. It was impossible to tell what it truly was. Historical records had too many missing pieces and ambiguities for this period of history. There were too few tombs, ancient cities, and literature that had been unearthed to create an effective confirmation. However, this didn't mean that no one had done the relevant research. Its rarity implied that there were still some relics and information left behind. The original Klein was a fanatic towards the history of the Fourth Epoch. He often read journal articles and books, so even now, Klein still remembered a lot of content. Whether it was the Solomon Empire, Tudor Empire, or Trunsost Empire, They all had similar architectural styles that went against common sense. They were disorderly, asymmetrical, and they stood out for their frequent use of black. The most typical characteristic were the candlesticks hanging from the ceiling and the chopped floral pattern marks on black wall. This was precisely why Klein's first reaction was that the underground structure belonged to the fourth epoch when he raised his lantern. He had seen circular metal poles with candlesticks embedded at the bottom that ran down from the dome, reminding him of the fourth epoch, which was shrouded in mystery, leaving many historians and archaeologists regretful of the lack of knowledge in that ancient period. Several journal articles have mentioned that the number of candlesticks within different buildings are different. Although the three empires find asymmetry beautiful, they seem to have strict and meticulous rules in every aspect. 3 on the left and 2 on the right is the highest standards that ordinary citizens can enjoy. This is based on the structure of the buildings and the houses that remain. Klein raised his arm and held the lantern high. He walked slowly, counting the candlesticks on both sides. The hall was even wider than he had expected. He had walked for at least 100 meters before he saw a platform half a meter above the ground. Only then did he see the thick wall that marked the end of the hall. 41 inverted candlesticks on the left and 40 on the right. This is a bit of an exaggeration. What level of aristocracy is this? Powerful nobility. The Antigonus and the Zeratul families are all aristocrats of the fourth epoch. They were also powerful and terrifying Beyonder family clan. The other noble families should be about the same. Holding the lantern in hand, Klein continued onward. He saw the stairs at the side of the half-height platform and saw the scuffing on the black stone tile. Is this really a relic of the fourth epoch? A thought flashed through Klein's mind. With his keen eyesight and the light from the lanterns, he found 2 iron black seats on top of the platform that was half a meter above the ground. Huge, ancient seats overlooked the other seats below. There were 2 seats. 2? Why 2? According to the layout, the seat here should represent the person with the most power and authority, but there are 2 of them. A powerful noble of equal strength. A double count, a double duke, or a double prince. Klein slowly began to feel that his knowledge of history was inadequate. He clearly remembered that many journal articles mentioned that the 3 empires, Solomon, Tudor, and Trunsost, had a strict hierarchy. Based on this theory, there shouldn't have been leaders of equal standing within a faction. Strange, Klein mumbled in a way meant for Miss Bodyguard. What's so strange about that? An ethereal voice suddenly sounded from behind him. In the vast, dark, empty, and silent ancient hall, this voice was exceptionally frightening. Klein's mouth twitched as he explained the characteristics, history knowledge, and puzzling points that he had observed to her. He eventually added, "The ventilation here is very good. I wonder if there are any other entrances." Miss Bodyguard, who had mostly blended into the darkness, listened silently as she gave Klein a penetrating glance. "How do you know so much?" "Because I was a university student in the history department." Klein cursed silently before smiling. If I hadn't chosen to be a detective, perhaps I would have become a diligent young historian. Miss Bodyguard didn't respond, nor did she disappear. Instead, she floated up to the platform first. With the lantern in hand, Klein quickly followed, discovering that the platform was very large. It was about 40 meters in length and 10 meters in breadth. The architectural style is grand and enlarged. It's also one of the characteristics of the fourth epoch, he said casually, as he carefully approached the 2 huge iron black chairs. He then raised his lantern and carefully inspected it. TT seems to be meant for a 3-meter-tall giant to sit on. There's an emblem on the back of the chair. On this side, it's a black crown. On the other side, it's a hand holding onto a scepter. I wonder what they symbolize on their own, Klein said to himself, not expecting an answer from Miss Bodyguard. However, the lady who was floating suddenly said, "This is the Tudor family's emblem." Huh? Klein looked over in surprise, noticing that Miss Bodyguard was referring to the hand holding the scepter. Tudor family? Is this a relic of the fourth epoch's Tudor dynasty? Which royal family member owned this palace? Klein frowned and said, "Do you recognize the other emblem?" "Think that it was ranked as equal to a Tudor family member." Miss Bodyguard shook her head without a word. Seeing this, Klein had to give up the idea of studying it for the time being and said, "After the Tudor and Trunsos families established their respective empires, they both maintained the original style that originated from the Solomon Empire, such as inverted candlesticks, scuff marks, and so on and so forth. This doesn't comply with common sense. If I were the emperor, even if I had to inherit many things, I would still make certain changes to mark my uniqueness. Does this mean that the three empires have hidden, unchanging connection? He guessed that Solomon, Tudor, and the Trunsos families wielded the Dark Emperor, which was the lawyer pathway. Similar styles were needed for acting. Miss Bodyguard remained silent for a few seconds before saying a few words. Only an emperor can be called an emperor. Is this a confirmation of my idea? Klein didn't ask any more questions. With the lantern in hand, he circled the two huge iron-black chairs, but he didn't discover anything else. Let's take a look ahead, Klein suggested. Before he finished his sentence, Miss Bodyguard had already floated towards the end of the platform, but the surrounding gloominess and coldness remained unchanged. A few meters ahead, Klein saw, with the help of the lantern's glow, 7 large, heavy black stone doors at the base of the hall. They were lined up, 2 on the left, 1 in the middle, 4 on the right, perfectly in line with the fourth epic's pursuit of asymmetry. Klein passed the cane to his lantern hand, tossed a coin at random, and whispered, "I should begin from the left." Ding! The copper penny tumbled down and landed on his palm, portrait facing up. "Let's go to the left." Klein took the lead. Miss Bodyguard silently followed until they reached the door on the far left before saying ethereally, "It's the same on the right." In other words, it didn't matter whether I did the divination. The corner of Klein's mouth curled up as he raised the lantern and examined the symbols and patterns on the door. With a deep black background, it was a crimson half-moon that was surrounded by radiant points of light. This, Klein's pupils constricted suddenly. This is the dark sacred emblem, the symbol of the Evernight goddess. During the fourth epoch, the Church of the Evernight goddess had supported the Tudor dynasty. He thoughtfully placed his hand on the stone door. Screech! The black stone door slowly opened amidst rough and heavy grinding sound. As the light from the lantern shone into the room, Klein began to see the interior, bit by bit. There was a few meters of open space at the entrance, also paved with dark stone tiles, and a platform nearly a meter high. Klein cautiously moved forward, holding up the lantern to illuminate the item on the platform. A few seconds later, a fiery radiance formed the outline of a huge statue. It was about 4 to 5 meters long and almost filled the entire room. It was an extremely beautiful lady with a hazy face. Her right hand supported her head as she laid down on the platform. She wore a layered black classical dress that wasn't overly complex. There was a circle of radiating rays at the bottom of her head. On this lady's dress, there were sparkling specks of radiance. They were pieces of bright and resplendent gems. At first glance, Klein felt as though he was seeing the night and the star. This was outlined against a circular shape under the lady's head that resembled a full moon. This, Klein's thoughts seemed to freeze, but a guess immediately plowed its way from within. Evernight goddess. Miss Bodyguard's voice carried a rare hint of puzzlement. Be it the symbolism or the actual form, it seemed to be a sculpture of the goddess. Klein's guess finally took shape, echoing loudly in his mind. He remembered asking Captain Dunn Smith about one of the differences between an evil god and a true god. The former was said to have an image that resembled that of an intelligent life form, but the latter only had sacred emblems formed by symbol. But today, at this very moment, in this ancient and bizarre underground structure, he saw a statue that looked like the Evernight goddess. What did this mean? Just thinking about it made Klein shudder. Could it be that the goddess was once an evil god? Maybe it's some other evil god that falls into the night domain. However, the dark sacred emblem by the door is no different from the one that is being used presently. Or perhaps, having the image of an intelligent being isn't a standard method to distinguish between true gods and evil gods. After all, the captain's level wasn't high enough, and his understanding of the situation wasn't necessarily accurate enough. It was also possible that the Tudors were deliberately blaspheming the goddess. Yes, it could also be a way of setting up some strange ritual. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. It left him feeling puzzled, nervous, and tense. However, he also felt a strange feeling which couldn't be described. After looking around, Klein, who didn't see anything else, took a deep breath and said, "Let's go to the other doors and take a look. I wonder what the other 6 doors correspond to. Would it be equally strange and evil?" he thought gravely. Miss Bodyguard nodded slowly. When he was out of the room, Klein carefully held his cane and lantern in the same hand, leaving his left hand free so that he could retrieve the contents of his pocket as quickly as possible in the event there was a sudden turn of events. Inside there were charms, Azek's characteristic, some tarot cards, and apart from the remaining Risego's characteristic, the all-black eye, his pocket contained all the means available to him. Klein and Miss Bodyguard had barely taken a step to the side when the light of the lantern illuminated the emblem on the door next to them. It was a simple drawing of a baby surrounded by the symbols of wheat, flowers, and spring water. The sacred emblem of Mother Earth, Klein said in a solemn voice. As a former Nighthawk, one of his basic skills was being able to distinguish the symbols of other churches. Miss Bodyguard nodded slightly, as though to confirm this. Her black Gothic regal dress looked even eerier and terrifying in such an environment and atmosphere. Her pale face looked like a grieving wraith under the illumination of the lantern. If any other adventurer were to come here and see this scene, they would definitely flee while stumbling out of fear. Holding his breath, Klein reached out with his left hand, pushed open the stone door and raised the lantern high. He found that the layout here was very similar to the one before, like a perfect fusion between a small prayer room and a giant statue. Across the empty wheat-colored stone tiles, Klein illuminated the 3 steps ahead of him with a lantern. On the platform was a white stone sculpture about 4 or 5 meters tall. It was a plump and beautiful lady, with ears of wheat growing from her feet, and she was surrounded by spring water. Her dress seemed to flutter, and embedded in it, there were different herbs and flowers, as well as the depiction of different animals. The lady's chest was raised high, and in her arms was an adorable infant in swaddling clothes. She stood there tall and sacred. "Don't tell me that this is the statue of Mother Earth," Klein said softly with his lips curled. Miss Bodyguard didn't answer or deny it. After checking their surroundings, the duo left the room and opened the 3rd door nearby. Behind this door was a corridor that allowed 4 people to walk alongside each other. Ahead of them it was dark and deep, filled with mystery and oddities. It was unknown where it led to. "Let's first confirm the situation behind the 4 doors on the right," Klein suggested. He didn't dare to rashly enter. Using her actions as an answer, Miss Bodyguard floated back. The duo opened the 4 stone doors on the right, in succession. They separately saw the storm's sacred emblem, which was made up of the symbol of gales and stormy waves, the sacred emblem of the sun, which was surrounded by lines, the sacred emblems of the god of combat, which was made from the combination of the symbol for dusk and a sword-shaped symbol, as well as the sacred emblem of knowledge and wisdom, which was represented by an open book and an omniscient eye. In contrast, there were 4 suspected statues of deities in the room. A dignified middle-aged man in black armor, standing over churning waves, surrounded by stormy winds, with lightning flashing behind him and a trident in his hand. There was a young man in a pure white robe, holding a book of deeds in one hand and a golden sphere which resembled the sun in the other. He was handsome and spirited. There was a warrior sitting on a throne high above, holding a sword in front of him. His face was hidden behind his helmet's visor, his entire body covered with an indescribable sense of decay. There was a hooded elder holding a book in the omniscient eye, with only his mouth, wrinkles, and long white beard exposed. Apart from the god of steam and machinery, there were 6 humanoid statues of the Orthodox gods in this strange hall. Considering the weak position of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery before the appearance of Roselle, there seemed to be some sort of explanation regarding this problem. "This is really strange," Klein exclaimed with a sigh, partially because he couldn't stop it and partially because he was testing Miss Bodyguard's reaction. This grand hall, which was 100 meters deep, actually had 6 of the Orthodox gods collected within it. This was something unimaginable in the current era. How could the Church of the 6 True Gods allow their gods to live in the same structure as the other gods? This was a custom that only existed during the 4th epoch. Also, what's with those humanoid statues? Although they look normal, unlike the sinister primordial demoness and the true creator statues, they still give off weird vibes, just what had happened to make the images of the 6 gods evolve into abstract symbols in this day of age. No, perhaps it's been like this all this time. But the master of this place, a noble who suspected to be a member of the Tudor family, purposely created statues of the 6 deities for some purpose. I thought of an item from a novel from my previous life. The 6-soul banner. While he waited for Miss Bodyguard's reply, Klein's mind wandered. Miss Bodyguard didn't answer his query and instead said blandly, "There's another door." That's right, Klein suddenly felt fear. From his point of view, doors placed in the middle often had a special meaning, perhaps the core region of this ancient structure. Of course, this also likely implied the highest amount of danger. In his opinion, doors placed in the center often had a special meaning, perhaps the core of this ancient building. Of course, this also meant that the situation was most likely the most dangerous. What are your thoughts on that area? Klein hesitated for 2 seconds and directly asked. Under the situation of not being able to use the gray fog to eliminate any interference, he felt that Miss Bodyguard's spiritual perception and spiritual instincts were more reliable than his divination means at present. After all, she was in a very special state, close to that of a spiritual body, allowing her to communicate with the spirit world without any obstruction to gain revelation. Miss Bodyguard closed her eyes and replied a few seconds later, "Very dangerous. But the danger is subdued. Once you venture deeper, don't touch anything." Subdued danger. Is this equivalent to having something sealed inside? As Klein guessed, he and Miss Bodyguard walked to the central stone door and stepped onto the dark floor. The light of the lantern seemed to dim a little, as though it found it difficult to drive out the darkness ahead. Klein had his left hand in his pocket, holding Azek's copper whistle and a few charms. After about 30 steps, Miss Bodyguard suddenly stopped. Klein raised the lantern in his right hand and saw that the road ahead was blocked by boulders and dirt. On the left and right were 2 stone doors in the same shape as the ones in the main hall. The right side was ajar and filled with mud and stone. Perhaps this ancient structure was above ground back then, but for some reason it eventually sank and collapsed, Klein mumbled. "There's only one direction we can choose from." Before he could finish his words, he saw Miss Bodyguard float ahead, stick to the huge rock, fuse into it, and disappear. Klein's mouth twitched, and he began to patiently wait. After a few minutes, Miss Bodyguard came out from the mud on the right, her body completely free of dust. "TT's completely collapsed," she concluded flatly. For a moment Klein was speechless and could only smile. Following that, the two of them simultaneously looked to the left where the ajar stone door was. There was a tiny crack. Klein went closer and carefully looked through the 3-centimeter gap. His spirit vision, which had originally been blocked by the stone door, immediately discovered something. There were at least 4 bright and powerful spiritual lights inside, 2 that were close to dark gold in color, and 2 that were dark blue like the sea. After using his spirit vision, a narrow scene appeared in Klein's normal vision. The firelight that entered the room illuminated the black stone tiles. On top of the tiles were piles of bones covered with rotten clothing, and a few of them emitted dark gold and dark blue light. Condensed Beyonder characteristics. Mystical items. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein swept his gaze to the ends of the room. Along the dark wall stood a bifold door. A bloody pair of bifold doors. There seemed to remnants of fresh blood on the door. They continued sliding down as they reflected the light. Klein had wanted to let Miss Bodyguard scout the way ahead when he suddenly felt a change in Azek's copper whistle that he was holding in his hand. The originally cold and mild whistle suddenly became bone-piercing. It was a profound feeling of death. This, Klein narrowed his eyes and instinctively took a step back. Then he noticed that his right forearm was numb and itchy, and that it was beginning to swell. The scene flashed through his mind as he immediately took out a tarot card with his left hand and slashed across his arm. What surged out from his wound wasn't blood, but tiny black squirming worms. Sizzle. When these worms fell to the ground, they eroded into smoke. They struggled and huddled, but in the end, they melted under the glow of the lanterns. After a few seconds, all the black worms in Klein's wound finally flowed out, leaving only crimson liquid. He wriggled his muscles to control the small wound and prevented the blood from flowing further. Miss Bodyguard watched this scene quietly, her pretty eyebrows creasing into a rarely seen frown. Klein was just about to speak when he discovered the coldness and deadliness of Azek's copper whistle hadn't abated. At the same time, his gaze landed on Miss Bodyguard's shadow. She never had a shadow to begin with. "Run!" Klein shouted and immediately ran towards the hall. Miss Bodyguard quickly floated up, and the two of them saw the lantern light in front of them gradually being swallowed up by a black shadow. Taboo, taboo, taboo. Klein ran like a hurricane, as fast as he could while the light around him faded away. Taboo, taboo, taboo. The shadow grew bigger and bigger, closer and closer, thicker and thicker. The light from the flame was about to be completely engulfed, and at that moment the door was still a few meters away. At that moment, Klein instinctively rushed forward and then rolled across the stone door. The light from the fire suddenly brightened, and the uneasiness in his heart instantly disappeared. Azik's copper whistle also returned to its mild and cold state. Miss Bodyguard floated beside him as she turned around and looked at the passageway, which had once again sunk into darkness. She said with an uncertain tone, "Evil spirit, evil spirit." Klein almost drew a deep breath when he heard that. Fortunately, as a clown, he was good at controlling his expression and reaction. In the field of mysticism, evil spirits were extremely terrifying monsters. The best of them could even be said to be on the same level as high-sequence beyond. An evil spirit is wandering within this ancient structure. For some reason, it's bound or imprisoned within that room. If it was an evil spirit, that explains why Mr. Azik's copper whistle responded. An evil spirit can be considered as an undead creature. Klein stood up and also looked at the path, which was now submerged in darkness. He felt as if there was a pair of cold eyes staring at him. In the cold and gloomy hall, Klein suddenly shivered. He retracted his gaze and said to Miss Bodyguard, "Let's return." From the way Azik's copper whistle reacted, it's likely that the room contains a terrifying evil spirit. Its danger level is highly likely to be above that of Nimble Right Master Rasago and Rear Admiral Hurricane Kalangos. It's been roaming these confines for centuries to thousands of years. Perhaps it's already equivalent to high-sequence Bayon. If it wasn't for its experiencing difficulties in letting its powers escape the room, I would already be dead. Even if Miss Bodyguard is a powerful Sequence 5, there's no hope of us turning the tides of battle with our powers combined. One needs to be aware of one's strength. I cannot be enticed by the suspected Beyonder characteristics and mystical items left in there. Greed often leads to death. Klein silently came up with a reason to convince himself. Miss Bodyguard turned her head to look at him. Without much emotion in her eyes, she asked, "What happens next?" "Next?" Klein silently gritted his teeth and said with deliberation, "Let Millet Carter get the police. Who knows when this evil spirit will escape? It's best to finish it as soon as possible." "No, that won't work. Mr. Carter doesn't know enough. By informing the police this way, the police department won't pay enough attention to it. The first batch of people who come to explore this place will suffer heavy casualties, and they might even indirectly help the evil spirit escape from its restraints. Also, for me to see these statues, a detective like me might be silenced. Did you see the bones and spiritual light in the room?" Miss Bodyguard once again cast her gaze towards the dark path behind the ajar stone door, and very slightly nodded her head. Klein thought quickly and said, "My guess is that these are the corpses of the explorers from before. They were killed by the evil spirit in that room, and one of the Beyonders left behind some mystical item. This might have had something to do with the Viscount family that lived beyond this premises. I plan to inquire about their last names, go to the library, and look for information about their descendants. Perhaps I might gain some valuable clues. After coming to a preliminary confirmation of the situation, I'll make a choice based on the severity of the situation. I might get some explosives, destroy the door, or send an anonymous letter to the police, detailing the existence of the evil spirit. However, I'll have to think of a way to avoid the risk ahead of time. This isn't too urgent. I can take my time." Miss Bodyguard quietly listened to what Klein had to say. Looking ahead, she said in an ethereal voice, "Are you not considering to get people to exorcise this evil spirit? Even if there were no mystical items left behind, the remains after the evil spirit dissipates are still precious enough." "It's the first time I've seen you talk so much, probably," Klein replied without hesitation. "The risk is too high. I think my life and health are more important." He organized his words and added, "The most powerful person I know is you. And from your performance just now, you don't seem to be a match for that evil spirit. I can't imagine any other way of finishing it, other than calling the police." Miss Bodyguard turned around, her pale face somewhat translucent. "You still have some sense," she commented calmly, then drifted toward the exit of the ancient hall. "Other than being suspected to be under the true creator's influence, in what way do I look like a madman?" Klein silently lampooned. He held the lantern and cane and followed behind Miss Bodyguard. Throughout the entire process, he felt as if he was being watched by the cold eyes of the dark corridor. It was only when they walked out of the stone door that suffused an ancient aura did the feeling suddenly disappear. Klein turned around and closed the door, sealing the inverted candlesticks, scuff marks, and the creepy statues of the 6 deities, allowing them to continue their thousand-year-long slumber in that unchanging darkness and silence. Patting the dust off his clothes, he switched the lantern in his other hand and hurried back to Millet Carter's basement. As for Miss Bodyguard, she had disappeared into thin air as usual. Millet Carter was pacing about in the basement. When he saw Klein exit, he hurriedly asked, "How is it? What's the situation inside?" Klein had long thought of an excuse as he said with an expression of fear, "Terrible, there are a lot of snakes in there, and many spots have collapsed. I plan to gather some information, gather some manpower, and once preparations are done, do another round of exploration. During this period of time, it's best that you don't send anyone in. Believe me, there are more venomous snakes in there than you can imagine." Millet drew a gasp and asked in fear, "Will they slither out? Do you know any experts that can deal with the snakes?" Klein immediately nodded. "I'll get people to help and try my best to deal with this matter. It's the cold autumn now, and the snakes aren't willing to move. As long as you don't send anyone to disturb them, nothing will happen. Okay, please hurry. I'll close this door and prevent anyone from entering." Hearing that, Millet relaxed a little. When Klein saw that his employer was truly intimidated by what he said, he quickly put down the lantern, nudged his gold-rimmed spectacles and said, "Next up, I'll gather some information. I'll first gain a preliminary understanding of the layout of the underground structure before I explore it again. That requires you to tell me which Viscount was the original owner of this house." Millet had bought this building precisely because it was an estate of a former noble, so he answered immediately, "Viscount Pound." "What do you know about him and his family?" Klein asked in a professional manner. Millet pondered and said, "Not much. I only know that he won his aristocratic title in the Battle of the Violated Oak. It once enjoyed an illustrious period, but decades later suddenly declined due to unknown reasons. The family kept losing its heirs, causing it to eventually have to seek out distant relatives to keep the aristocratic title. And the new Viscount Pound is heh. He squandered most of the family's fortune, and he was demoted to baronet by the king. He's probably still in Backland and can go bankrupt at any moment." Battle of the Violated Oath. The Battle of the Violated Oath that began in 738 during the Fifth Epoch. Having successfully graduated as a history student, Klein instinctively recalled the corresponding knowledge. The war that happened about 6 centuries ago was a war involving religion. The southern Fainapotter kingdom originally believed in both Mother Earth and the god of knowledge and wisdom, but due to some influencing factors, the two churches began to be at odds with each other, and their believers often clashed. During that period, its two neighbors in the north, the Lone Kingdom and the Intis Kingdom, seized the opportunity to start a war in the name of protecting freedom of religion. In the later stages of the war, the Fasek Empire joined the fray and attempted to destroy the ploy by Lone and Inti. However, they still failed to turn the situation around. The result of the war was that the border between Leon and Fainapotter, as well as Intis and Fainapotter, countries such as Lemberg, Masson, and Seger, gained independence. They mainly believed in the god of knowledge and wisdom, leaving the Church of Mother Earth as the only religion in the Fainapotter kingdom. The conflict that lasted 5 years was called the Battle of the Violated Oath, because both sides of the war accused their adversaries of violating the holy oath at the end of the Fourth Epoch. After that, there was more than 300 years of peace in the northern continent. This didn't mean that there was no conflict between nations, but rather, there were no wars on that scale again. It lasted until Roselle invented the steam engine and improved the sailboats and artillery. This is the information recorded in the history textbooks. Thinking about it now, since it involved faith, there must have been some Bayonders from the church involved. There must have been an intense Bayonder war, however. It's said that that era was a period with few Bayonders, squadron battle. Could the Pound family's sudden waning and continuous loss of heirs, which happened decades ago, have something to do with the discovery of the ancient structure underground? Klein thoughtfully asked, "Do you know where Baronet Pound currently lives?" Sorry, I don't know." Millet shook his head slightly. Klein asked a few more questions, but seeing that he couldn't get any more information, he bade farewell and returned to 15 Mince Street. It was almost 5 in the afternoon, and the sky was as dark as the night. Klein thought that the public libraries would be closed by then, so he temporarily put aside the underground structure and prepared dinner for himself. He had wanted to learn to make Fainapotter noodles based on a recipe in the newspapers, but he ended up with noodles mixed in meat, sauce, and vegetable. To his surprise, it tasted pretty good. After having had his fill, Klein tossed a coin casually, divining if he should inform the police. He received a negative answer. The Backland evening was as serene as other cities, at least in Sherwood Borough. Klein was sleeping soundly, wandering through different dreams in an adrift manner when he suddenly realized, with a jolt, that he was dreaming. Someone is invading my dreams. Klein resisted the urge to frown and pretended to look around in confusion. He found himself in a scorching yellow desert. A roar suddenly came from the sky, and a huge monster dyed in black and gold flew over. The creature had a thick, lizard-like body and a pair of wide wings covered in a hide on its back. It descended and blotted out the sun in the sky. A dragon. A powerful dragon. Klein saw scales the size of a plate, a gaping mouth that emitted pure light, and two dark golden vertical pupils. Roar! The dragon spat out a beam of light that seemed to envelop everything. Soon, large swaths of the desert was obliterated. Amid the light, a figure jumped into the air. He was 3 or 4 meters tall, but he didn't have the unique vertical eye of the giants. He had a handsome, young face, and he wore black full-body armor which seemed to be spattered with blood. This giant knight swung his broadsword upwards in countless bluish-white flames, which appeared a little purple, condensed into long spears. They shot at the dragon. It was as if he had an entire army of illusory Bayonders helping him in battle. In the midst of the meteor shower, the giant knight leaped onto the head of the dragon, and he swung his sword down. The afterimages he had created earlier instantly overlapped, and the sword rays turned into intersecting lightning. Pell! The ground shook wildly, and the dragon fell, splattering its dark gold blood. At that moment, the scene changed to a huge bloody door. It was the same bloody door that Klein had seen in the ancient structure that very afternoon. With a creak, the bloody door opened a crack, allowing him to catch a glimpse of a black high-backed chair. A man of normal height sat on the high-backed chair. He had his head lowered, silent and deathly still. As his vision got closer and closer, Klein saw the man's clothes clearly. He seemed to be the knight that had just killed the dragon, and he was still wearing the black armor that was stained with blood. The only difference was that he was no longer 3 or 4 meters tall. At this moment, the man suddenly raised his head. His handsome young face had terrifying signs of decay, his eyes ice-cold and emotionless. Klein jumped in fright and awoke from his dream. Opening his eyes, he saw the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains. Perception and attempt under the dim crimson moonlight, Klein pulled back his blanket and got up. For a seer, putting weight on dreams was a basic requirement, and the dream he just had could never be dismissed as a simple nightmare. Dressed in relatively comfortable clothes, he came before the full-body mirror and said in a low voice, "I dreamed of the blood-stained door in that room." His bodyguard's figure slowly outlined itself above the mirror. She replied expressionlessly, "The influence of the evil spirit's aura. TT will gradually weaken until it disappears." "Is that so?" Klein nodded slightly and returned to the side of the bed. He picked up the gold pocket watch and popped it open. Seeing that it was still early, he lay back down to sleep. This time, he no longer encountered the same dream as before. Sunday morning the next day, in high spirits, Klein made himself a soft-boiled egg to go with buttered bread. In the Lone Kingdom, or rather in the countries of the northern continent, it was a must for gentlemen to read the newspapers at breakfast, and Klein was no exception. He opened up the newspapers he subscribed to, the Tussock Times, Backland Morning Post, and Backland Bulletin. The Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill has been officially passed by the House of Lords. The first examination will be held in early December, and the second examination will be held at the end of January next year. The final interview will be held 2 weeks after that. Within a week, the government will announce the positions and requirements involved in this exam and begin the registration process. Reporters surmise that most of it will be held in Backland. Klein scanned the contents, picked up his cup, and sipped his Psy black tea. He couldn't help but think of Benson and thought to himself, the bill is passed at the end of September. The positions will be announced in the beginning of October, and registrations will be completed by early November. The examinations will start at the beginning of December. The timing is tight and very unreasonable. That implies how much of a rush the king and the prime minister is in to have this enacted. But that's advantageous for Benson. He prepared 2 months ahead of everyone else. Even if he can't compare to the elite graduates of the universities, he would definitely be able to beat most of his competition, and the positions the elites are aiming for wouldn't clash with his. He should be fine. Klein wanted to tap his chest 4 times to draw out a crimson moon and say, "May the goddess bless him." But then he remembered that Miss Bodyguard was nearby and resisted the urge. After all, he had claimed to be a believer of the god of steam and machinery. After finishing his last mouthful of bread, he continued reading the papers. Both houses have passed the National Atmospheric Pollution Council bill, allowing the government to set up such an organization. The coming month will be a critical period for the various parties to become a member of the council. An independent alkali industry public prosecutor has been approved with the goal of minimizing the pollution levels in acid and alkali factories. The 5th page doesn't have an advertisement for the purchase of goods from the Ernst firm. There's no need to consider participating in the Beyonder gathering tomorrow night. Tingen City, 2 Daffodil Street. Benson read and reread the news in the papers, forgetting the bread on his plate. The Civil Servant Unified Examination Bill was passed. Dressed in a long black dress, Melissa looked at her brother, who was acting oddly. The newspapers from the past few days had been playing up the bill that would be passed this time. Benson finally put down the newspaper, wiped his black hair, and exhaled slowly. Yes. At this moment, the two of them suddenly fell into silence. The room was completely silent. It even lacked the sound of knives and forks colliding with the dining plates. The indescribable atmosphere was broken by Bella, the maid who came out of the kitchen. Benson smiled and said, "This is foreseeable. Actually, the most important thing is the previous piece of news." "Oh?" Melissa's expression was unusually quiet. Benson took a bite of his bread and smiled. "The news that the Backland Polytechnic will be restructured into a university. TTL formally accepts students next year. It won't need tests on grammar and classical literature, but will instead focus on the technical aspects. It's very suitable for graduates and students of technical schools everywhere. Melissa, I think you can try." But Melissa subconsciously retorted. Benson interrupted her with a smile. "TTS tuition will be half as cheap as the Tingen, Perth, K-Boy and Backland, and the other universities. It's equivalent to the Constant Industry University in Midseashire, and there will be even more opportunities for scholarships. Melissa, don't you like machinery, steam, and this stuff? This is the best opportunity for you to have access to much advanced and deeper knowledge. Give it a try, how about it? Don't worry about wasting money. Although that money can allow us to maintain our present lives without working, we're still young. We must not define our lives like this. As you can see, compared to a few months ago, my grammar has improved a lot. It might be better if we change environments. No, you can't bear to part with Tingen and this place. Well, we'll come back eventually, but not when we're young." Melissa looked at the various components on the tea table as her lips moved a few times, and she said, "What about Bella?" After Klein's death, she didn't want to hire any more maidservants, but when she thought of how tragic Bella's life would be after she lost her job, she gave up on the idea. After all, the extra expense of 5 solely a week was already nothing to the Morty family, which had an annuity of at least £300. To this, Benson shook his head and laughed. "There are still a few more months before that happens. We can let Bella find a new job ahead of time. Before that, we will continue to pay her and provide her with a bedroom. Furthermore, her cooking skills are much better than before, so she can apply to be a chef at someone's home. It's a pity, haha. Of course, everything depends on the premise that you can pass the entrance exams at Backland's University of Technology." He had wanted to say that it was a pity that Bella didn't have much time to learn how to cook, but after looking at Melissa's gloomy expression, he forcefully changed the topic. Before Melissa could say anything, Benson smiled and touched his hair. "Team planning on resigning tomorrow, and will focus on preparing for the exam. Most of the positions are said to be in Backland. That's my goal. I hope we can go there together." Melissa was silent for a moment before she slowly nodded her head. At the same time, she put down her fork and knife, wiped her mouth with a napkin, and said, "I'm going to the bathroom." "All right." Benson watched his sister leave the dining table, and the smile that had been plastered over his face rapidly vanished. He took out the silver pocket watch with the vine leaf patterns, took a close look at it, and sighed very quietly. During the whole of Sunday, Klein busied himself with the public libraries in the Sherwood borough in search of information related to Viscount Pound. But the Viscount's family didn't have a single biography, nor did it arouse the interest of any historian to conduct a special study. They were scattered across the annals of history, and Klein, who had no search function to use, felt a throbbing pain in his head as he faced the vast collection of books and essays. He spent 6 hours browsing through a lot of information, but failed to find any useful information. I have to find someone who has a deep knowledge of the history of the nobility. Or I have to bribe someone in the police department to get the address of Baronet Pound. He's an aristocrat, and the police department must have a corresponding record, and there aren't many aristocrats. When Klein got home, he stood in front of the mirror and talked to the air. The surface of the mirror quickly outlined Miss Bodyguard's gothic regal dress and the black bonnet on her head. She nodded slightly, as if agreeing with Klein. She then suddenly spoke out in a dreamy voice, "The employment period is over." "I know the 3 days are up," Klein thought for a moment and asked, "TF, I can obtain some clues about the Pound family. Would you like to know?" Miss Bodyguard didn't answer, but gave a slight nod. Through Marek?" Klein asked. After nodding her head again, Miss Bodyguard bent down, lifted up her skirt and bowed. Her figure quickly disappeared, and the reflection in the mirror was no longer anything special. Klein looked around and didn't relax as a result of that. He proceeded systematically to prepare dinner and fill his stomach. He waited until it was late in the night before returning to his bedroom and drew back the curtains. Then he took out the iron cigarette case and reached out to touch Risego's all-black eye. A series of illusory roars immediately rampaged through his mind, seeming to tear apart his mind and destroy his thoughts. With great difficulty, Klein resisted the pain which was making his head explode. Once again, he saw the black threads spreading out from different parts of his body. They were densely packed and illusory, reaching out endlessly. He quickly released his grip to escape from the negative influence. After nearly a minute, everything returned to normal. "Phew, I can finally go up to the gray fog and verify the spiritual perception I had before," Klein silently said to himself as he quickly set up the ritual, summoned himself, and responded to himself. Then in his spirit form, he carried Azek's copper whistle, picked up the iron cigarette case, and returned above the gray fog. Klein sat at seat of honor at the ancient long table, using his fingers to create spiritual flames and burning the blood-stained documents in the corner and any other items that were no longer needed. When he was done, he opened the iron cigarette case and was surprised to find that the all-black eye had become silent, no longer showing any signs of madness, but that corruptive influence was still settling within. It just wasn't active, as if it was in hibernation. "As expected, it's impossible to separate them directly," Klein muttered. Following that, on the other side of the ancient table, a man in a hooded robe appeared. Just like his previous attempt to create a clone, this man was stiff and lifeless. It was obvious that he wasn't someone real at a glance. There was no way he could deceive the members of the Tarot Club. However, Klein already had an idea regarding this. He extended his hand and held the all-black eye. There was silence in his ears, and there were no longer any terrifying howl. Using the amassed Beyonder characteristic, he could see that there were also black threads floating out from the fake body opposite him. Soon after, Klein carefully let his spirituality spread out through the all-black eye, touching a few of the illusory threads. All of a sudden, he felt like he was holding onto something. With a thought from him, the fake person raised his hand. "It worked. I can use the ability of the Nimblewright Master to create a fake Tarot Club member. However, this is draining on me. I'm unable to maintain a second one. The symbol on the back of the chair won't change accordingly, but it's not like Miss Justice and the rest can see it." Klein happily practiced, over and over again, even learning how to manipulate his clone's throat and mouth to let him speak. When his spirituality was almost exhausted, he smiled and said to the fake person in front of him, "Welcome, new member. Which tarot card do you wish to draw?" After saying that, he closed his mouth. The fake person opposite him lifted his hand to stroke his chin as he laughed hoarsely. "World. I choose the card, the World." Gathering, if the Fool signified the beginning of the Tarot Club, then the World signified the end, a perfect ending of a cycle and sublimation. Klein had named his Smurf the World, because he hoped that it would lead to a beautiful beginning and end. "In the future, I'll be able to make the world make requests or do things that wouldn't be convenient for me. This will greatly reduce the possibility that my image as Mr. Fool will collapse. With an alt-no, a Smurf truly is what makes life complete." Klein sighed in relief and waved the world away. Following that, he spread out his spirituality, wrapped himself, and stimulated a descent into the gray fog and returned to the real world. He had left Risego's all-black eye above the gray fog. After all, he couldn't usually use the item anyway, and he had to constantly worry about having it discovered by others or losing it. After putting away the summoning ritual materials, Klein looked up towards the crimson moonlight that passed through the curtains, filled with anticipation for tomorrow's gathering. When it came to understanding the aristocracy, he believed that Miss Justice would definitely surpass 99% of the people of Leon. And with his Smurf, the world, he could directly ask her about the Pound family without worrying about affecting his image as the fool. Of course, this had to be done in a more tactful manner. After all, Detective Sherlock Moriarty was also looking for information on the Pound family, and only with enough information would he be able to perform a divination above the gray fog. Klein thought hard for a while before he relaxed and fell asleep. After entering the gray fog, it was as though the remnants of the evil spirit's aura had completely disappeared. Klein slept until dawn, but he didn't see the sun because of the thin fog outside. He continued as planned, heading to the rest of the public libraries in Backland, but he no longer queried the librarians nor did he mention the Pound family. He only leafed through the materials concerning the nobility by himself. At 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, Klein entered the mysterious space above the gray fog ahead of time. Inside the vast and ancient palace, he sat down at the seat belonging to the fool. He conjured the fake world on the opposite side of the mottled bronze table as he familiarized himself with operating the world. After a few minutes, Klein took out his pocket watch and glanced at it, sending a message to the crimson star that symbolized the sun to prepare for the gathering. While he waited, he played with the all-black eye and fitted it with a silver chain. Then he wound it around his right wrist and covered it with his sleeve. At 3 in the afternoon, rays of light shot out from the palace that resembled a giant's residence. Justice, the Hanged Man, and the sun, each projected a blurry silhouette dyed in crimson. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool tilde good afternoon." Audrey was about to greet every member of the Tarot Club when her gaze suddenly fell upon the figure seated at the very end. It was a stranger wearing a hooded black robe. It was also illusory and hazy. "This is—" Audrey looked at Mr. Fool with both puzzlement and delight. "Has the Tarot Club grown bigger again? Is it Forz or Zio? No, the height doesn't match. Is it someone else?" While Audrey was deep in thought, Klein leisurely leaned back and said, "This is a new member, Mr. World." At the same time, through his gray, fog-augmented spirit vision, he discovered that the surface color of the sun's astral projection had become a little purer, but it had yet to reach the standards of Sequence 8. His initial judgment was that the sun had completely digested the Bard potion. "Hello," Audrey greeted politely, curiously scrutinizing the new member. She quickly read some of the corresponding details through the hazy fog. "Mr. World is a person who is reserved. He seldom moves and always wears a straight face. I wonder where he's from. Lone, Entes, or a place as mysterious as the City of Silver." Audrey nodded thoughtfully. After so many gatherings, she had deduced one thing from the fact that the sun couldn't engage in their conversations. That was, that he was most likely not speaking the Lone language, and that the information that he heard was most likely translated by Mr. Fool. After the Hanged Man, Alger, and the sun, Derek, greeted the world respectively, to which the newcomer gave a rather cold response, Klein looked at Justice and said, "The 2 candidates you have nominated are still under examination. TL give you a simple task. You can entrust it to them in your name. This is part of the examination. It should be this strict." Not only was Audrey not disappointed, she even felt that it was only necessary. The members of the Tarot Club must be strictly selected, not just anyone can become one. She thought proudly before adding in a somewhat guilty tone, "And for me to be pulled in by Mr. Fool at the very beginning shows that I was lucky, and luck is a unique quality as well." "All right, please issue the mission." Audrey gave an affirmative answer. Klein stretched out his right hand and placed it on the table, showing a picture of Lanevis and his dressing. "Investigate the man in the painting. He's in Backland." Klein had the portrait appear in front of Miss Justice. Audrey looked over and saw a young man with neatly combed black hair and round glasses. He had a full forehead. It was a colored oil painting, with taunting brown eyes that seemed abnormally protruded, and at the bottom were the words "formerly known alias, Lanevis, and other information." It's a simple mission, which means that the target isn't strong, however. There must be something special about him that makes Mr. Fool aware of his existence. Although it's a simple mission, there might be a deeper purpose behind it. For someone as powerful as him, it shouldn't just be a test. Audrey momentarily allowed her to throng her mind. Only after a few seconds did she say, "I'll entrust it to them." The two ladies seemed to have many connections in Backland, which would serve to help in finding Lanevis. After confirming the matters pertaining to his revenge, Klein fell silent, and he deliberately allowed his Smurf to take center stage. The world surveyed the area and spoke with a hoarse voice. "Mr. Fool told me that I can issue missions and gather ingredients here. Is that so?" "Yes," Audrey elegantly nodded and said. "However, you need to wait patiently. What's going to happen next is Mr. Fool's reading time. I completed my mission to assassinate Inti's Ambassador Backerland, but I didn't even mention it to occupy this period of time," she thought, raising her chin slightly. "Miss Justice, you really have a great sense of mastership. I'll have to pay the price of knowledge later so that the assassination of Backerland can truly come to an end." Klein looked away, amused, and looked over at the hanged man. Alger Wilson didn't speak blindly because of the appearance of a new member. He remained silent and observed in secret. At this moment, when he saw Mr. Fool looking at him, he quickly and humbly bowed and said, "This time, there are still 6 pages. The final page will be given to you next time." "Sure." Klein nodded. The hanged man quickly focused his mind, recalled the contents, and expressed them with his mind. He quickly finished writing 6 pages of the diary and saw them suddenly vanish and appear in Klein's hand. Klein looked down and swept through the contents of the first page. "Off February. I have a 3rd child. I named him Bornova. My eldest daughter, Bernadette, was lucky. Her mother and I were just low-sequence Bayonders back then. She is free to choose the path she wants to take. My eldest son, Seal, is the most unfortunate. He inherited a minute amount of Bayonder characteristics, but he has to follow my path. Perhaps he could make changes at sequence 4, but attaining high sequences are never easy. My 2nd son, Bornova, was born between Bernadette and Seal. I have his characteristics equivalent to sequence 5 Bayonder. This has reduced the burden on me, allowing me to digest my potion even faster, accelerating my advancement. And when he was just born, he was already showing various traits of an astromancer. Zaratul came to congratulate me in secret and praised Bornova as a lovely angel. I asked this master of divination what he would accomplish in the future. He only smiled and didn't answer me. When I asked him about Seal's future, he finally said that death is an inevitable ending, but that might be a good thing. Seriously, a seer's words are always so vague that it makes one want to pry their mouths open. When I finally asked about Bernadette's future, he suddenly became very serious. He said she would hate me, detest me, turn her back on me, and she would become an important figure in the mysterious world. Sometimes, you really shouldn't ask about the result of a divination. I find it hard to believe that my adorable and kind Bernadette, who cares for her brother, adores her father, and pampers her mother, would hate me and betray me. Why would that happen? What excessive act did I do? Maybe she'll have someone she loves but am not satisfied with. Some punk that Peel end up killing. No, Zaratul isn't a soothsayer, and the divination he receives might be wrong. Forget it, Roselle. I think I smell the scent of some contrived family melodrama. After reading the first page of the diary, Klein couldn't help but lampoon silently. At the same time, he naturally recalled what Zaratul had told him about the future of Bernadette, an important figure in the mysterious world. Was this referring to the world of the Bayonder? What level would someone be deemed an important figure? Klein turned the pages thoughtfully. 22nd May. Florin of the Sauron family actually wants me to be his subordinate. Do I look like someone who would be a lackey? His attitude is simply unacceptable. I swear that I'll one day make him pay the price for his arrogance today. However, some of the things he mentioned are very interesting and worth pondering over. Blasphemy. Florin said that the history of the Sauron family exceeds 2,000 years, making it longer than even the Church of the God of Craftsmanship's history. They witnessed all the cooperation and strife, light and darkness in the Fourth Epoch, and they have survived until this very day. Other than the Augustus family of Lone, the Einhorn family of Fasak, and the Castia family of Fainapotter, the other powerful families that have been deemed their equal, such as the Antigonus family and the Zaratul family, have been relegated as vestiges of history, or have turned to nothing but rats in the sewers, hiding from the public as shady existences. He said that making me his subordinate, a subordinate of the ancient and glorious Sauron family, is a gift to me. Back then, I wanted to FK all 8 generations of his ancestors. However, for the Sauron family to have a history exceeding 2,000 years is indeed surprising. The fourth epic is known as the Epic of the Gods. Be it the 7 orthodox deities of the present times, or Death, primordial demoness, dark side of the universe, and the true creator, they all remained active in the real world. Legend had it that they frequently did miracles. For the Sauron family to last to this day and enjoy its current high standing, it's definitely not an easy matter. Their long history has given them far more than just arrogance. They must be hiding many secrets, and perhaps even extremely terrifying sealed artifacts. They are truly a colossus that stands tall above the earth, one that people can't look straight at. Upon reading this, Klein had a lot of ideas. For Roselle to be able to overthrow the rule of the Sauron family, he must have experienced a horrifying and heart-stirring struggle. Even if the Sauron family didn't have a Grade 0 sealed artifacts, they definitely had no lack of Grade 1 sealed artifacts. Adding to the possibility of having high-sequence Beyonders, even if the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery fully supported Roselle, it's unlikely that any good outcome might come out of it. Could it be that before all of that happened, the Sauron family was already beginning to wane and weaken, and the Inti's revolution was just an external manifestation of this state? What did they experience during that period of time? Did they lose sealed artifacts? Did the high-sequence Beyonders die? Did that attract the attention of many ambitious people? Judging from this diary, the Augustus family of Lone is no stranger to the Antigonus and Zaratal family. Internally, they should have corresponding records. The son had previously mentioned that the City of Silver has endured for more than 2,500 years in the Dark Age. According to my initial judgment, that's the date of the Cataclysm. In the past 200 years, the Sauron family claimed to have a history spanning more than 2,000 years. I wonder if it will extend to the point before the City of Silver. I'll try to find an opportunity to mention the Sauron clan and see the son's reaction. If the son still has a look of stupefaction, it would indirectly mean that the Sauron family only rose up after the Cataclysm. Perhaps they had benefited greatly from the Cataclysm to become nobles in the 4th epoch, and royalty in the 5th epoch. Well, even if the son doesn't know, it doesn't prove it completely. Perhaps he didn't learn his history well. When Klein turned to the 3rd page, he found that the content should have been written in the early days of Roselle's appointment as consul of the Inti's Republic. From the diary entries on this page, it can be seen that Roselle had developed and promulgated a new civil code which encouraged inventions, protected trade, and the incubation of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't him merely satisfying his own warped humor of acting as this world's Napoleon and his ambition to change the world. What he did allowed him to reconcile with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. The Eternal Blazing Sun was also the god of deeds, the guardian of businesses. The closer to the times the civil code was, and the more prosperous trade was made it more in line with the needs of the church. Judging from this part of the diary, the relationship between Roselle and the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun was gradually thawing and beginning to improve. When he brazenly claimed the title of emperor more than 10 years later and called himself Caesar, it's likely that he obtained the simultaneous endorsement of the two churches. Otherwise, it would have been too risky. Then, what resulted in his assassination? Klein cast his gaze at the 4th page in puzzlement. 11th August. That retard Florin is showing off again. He said that he's the most promising member of the Sauron family generation to become a high-sequence Beyonder, because he's very similar to his great-great-grandfather. Is there any necessary connection? I looked him up and down, left and right, but I couldn't find any sign of talent. Moreover, in the field of Beyonders, is talent important? Well, figuring out the essence to acting can be a core element of talent, but that's not necessary. As long as one knows the acting method and not be stupid enough to misunderstand the meaning, or avoid doing things that easily result in a loss of control, then one has a chance to completely digest the potion. Which is to say, just a bit more time and effort needs to be spent. In one's lifetime, it's not impossible to become a high-sequence Beyonder. The main obstacle to becoming a high-sequence Beyonder is the difficulty of obtaining Beyonder ingredients and the difficulty of corresponding ritual. Of course, I have to admit that those born as Beyonders have more time to prepare. Was Florin's great-great-grandfather high-sequence Bayon? Does looking like him imply talent? It can be seen that at the time of writing this diary entry, Roselle was still very young, and that he wasn't aware of the two laws of Bayonder characteristics: indestructibility and conservation. Klein nodded indiscernibly. With his current knowledge, he could probably understand the hidden meaning behind Florin Sauron's words. High-sequence Bayonder's Bayonder characteristic remains contained a spirit mark. This was also one of the reasons why it was easy for people to lose control when concocting potions with this ingredient. And people who resembled the original owner could avoid this negative influence to the greatest extent. Their chances of success were higher than the average person, so they were considered gifted. How holy artifacts recognized their masters probably shared the same condition. This achieves the same goal via different approaches as the acting method, but it can't be popularized. Once the advancement is successful, one would still have to do the acting method required of the potion to completely digest its characteristics. While in deep thought, Klein glanced at the two diary entries at the back of the page and discovered how much Emperor Roselle enjoyed the liberalness in Intis, but he was worried that his future wife would be equally liberal. With the paper making some noise, Klein placed the fifth page at the top. 20th April. I participated in that ancient organization's secret gathering once again. Those members still leave me shaking. It's hard to believe that they're actually all members of this organization. This time, I learned some of the ancient organization's philosophy. They believe that people will always lose some of their individuality bit by bit until they sleep. Hence, by trying hard to observe and remember oneself, one can use the various types of information to achieve the purification needed to face the final end of day. They've kept and passed down secrets for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They believe that dusk is inevitable and that doomsday cannot be avoided. They believe in the original creator and believe that he is not truly dead. When dusk comes and everything ends, he will wake up from his slumber and let everything return to him. He will create a new world, a new history. All of the actions from this organization stem from this belief. It can be said that they show great animosity to the true creator. They aren't stingy with their descriptions to describe him as fallen and evil. They wield the second blasphemy slate and the 22 paths of the divine, but they only allow members to choose a few of them, with the exception of those who were already Bayonders when they joined. Are there any secrets to these pathways? TL first jot it down and analyze it in the future. These pathways are Bard, Sailor, Reader, and Spectator. I have to change my habits of calling these sequence pathways in the future. Using those names in that ancient organization makes me appear quite uneducated. This is very similar to what I've analyzed from my hostile relations and from Mr. A's request, with it being very similar to how the Bard, Sailor, Reader, and Secret Suppliant pathways can be exchanged at sequence 4. Is Manipulator a high sequence of the Spectator pathway? Why do many secret organizations declare that the apocalypse would definitely befall us one day? For example, the Demoness sect, this ancient organization, and they themselves do not rely on this to proselytize. Is it a requirement for brainwashing, or would there really be a so-called dusk? Klein thought of many things, but due to a lack of information, he was unable to come to a definite answer. At the same time, he couldn't help but silently lampoon Roselle. Can't you just write down the name of that organization? Resisting the changes in his expression and body movements, Klein turned to the last page, which had relatively little content, and read. Isjan, a beginning of a new year. I happen to finish my first card of blasphemy. T will hide the ultimate secret of the 22 paths of the divine in these different cards of blasphemy and scatter them across the world. If things fail, they'll be the best insurance that my children can fall back onto. P'll disrupt the order they wish to have and spread the profound mysteries of the divine. These cards of blasphemy will possess characteristics of being anti-divination and anti-prophecy. Apart from the ones I'm giving my children, the fated ones will receive it. Team, a person who makes sure to square accounts when it comes to grudges, and after I die, who cares if floods deluge the heaven? Oh, I didn't create that sentence. In short, the more chaotic the world is, the better it is. You have to consider how to name the cards of blasphemy that will form a set. The Paths of the Divine, number 22. The Major Arcana Tarot cards also have 22 cards. They can match quite well, but there are a few that don't meet the requirements. I need to make some changes to match the original potion name. That ancient organization is my last and biggest insurance. I don't know if they'll support me, or the manner in which they'll support me in. I still remember the shock when I first saw the blasphemy slate. So it turns out that the Bayunder pathways are paths of the divine. It really is true that the blasphemy slate is blaspheming the deity. Above every pathway sequence 1, there is still a sequence 0. And there's a corresponding potion and ritual. Each pathway has a sequence 0. And sequence 0 is the sequence of a true God. For example, sequence 0 Sun.